I'm down for it.
There we go.
So for you headbangers out there, for you, 80s long-haired hairband.
That are still the only ones that can outsell an arena in 2025.
Still amazed what AI can do.
It is amazing. And to think there was no studio involved, there was nothing. Just a few words. Tell it what you want.
Yeah, I need to send you a copy of this so you can have it for fun.
Yes.
Again, we made that in Sona. Sona is one of the many, many, many amazing AI tools that you can use. So today, Chris, we're back in the saddle in the jam session. Lots to talk about. We've got a couple of great guests. I'm excited. Always excited to have physician founders hang out with us. Definitely. They bring a lot of unique insight, particularly since they're, in the arena, figuring out what's the clinical problem that needs to be solved. They're literally trying to figure out while they're doing cases, while they're seeing patients. And, it's super helpful to bring that sort of insight to a product as companies attempt to scale. So,
yeah. And that's, the thing is that they learn so much of this intraoperatively. There's so many things that in the midst of doing, they go, this could be better. And I've already got an idea.
Yep.
And some of those can be step changes, but a lot of those can be extremely creative.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're excited to have Dr. Sean Churchill and Chance Leonard from Capitan Orthopedics, who are going to tell their story in the shoulder space. And let's bring them on board with a round.
Let's do it.
Gentlemen.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good
I love
morning.
the applause. This is awesome.
You should already feel like just on top of the clouds, Sean.
Yeah.
That walk-up music was absolutely incredible. You guys did that with AI?
That was great. Well done.
Wow.
Isn't that fun? It's just crazy. I literally went to this AI platform called Sona, and you just type in a prompt, and the prompt was something like this. It was create podcast intro music for a podcast about the medical device industry entitled MedTech Jam Session with Chris and Mike D. And we want a 80s heavy metal hair band.
So if you wanted your own version in reggae, we can do it.
Yeah. Yeah. So we might, you never know. We're probably going to play around with it at some point, maybe do some R&B, some country Western.
Oh yeah.
You just never know what's going to happen on the jam session.
Oh,
I even heard ideation to commercialization.
Yes.
In the music.
Yeah.
If you hear the whole song, you're like, this is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I mean, it was so addictive to me after Mike told me about the Suno app that I had to make a song for all the grandkids. And they are tripping.
I'm sure. These days, my grandkids play like baseball, softball, t-ball, and they all have walkout songs when they come to bat. It's crazy.
Yes, it is.
Anyway, we're not here to talk about t-ball or AI generated music. We are here to talk about orthopedics. Dr. Churchill, thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate this. This is great.
Yeah, so we'd love to hear your story about how you went about your clinical practice journey, how that evolved into developing, designing products, how that, evolved into getting into entrepreneurship, venture funding, and then eventually starting your own company and scaling it from there. We'd love to kind of hear that background story before we kind of get into what Capitan Orthopedics is building.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. So
connected dots.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll tell you, born and raised in Colorado, got my engineering degree at Colorado State University, and actually was a professional engineer for 3 years. My wife and I had to earn money for medical school. And so I was a professional engineer for 3 years, and then I went to University of Michigan for medical school. And I'll tell you that the engineering mind, I mean, some people think it's a gift, some people think it's a curse, but it's always going and it's always tinkering. You're in line at Starbucks and you're watching something the barista's doing. You think, I could fix that. I can help you with that. So it is there, and it's always prevalent in me. And I'll tell you that the first time I realized that medicine was not optimized, if you will, for lack of a better term, was I was actually a medical student, and I was in vascular surgery. And, these were brutal days where you start rounding at 5 a.m. Your cases would finish at 11 at night. And so, you're in medical school. And I was on this, very complex case, this abdominal aneurysm where the aorta was just enlarging. And the vascular surgeon was very concerned because he had to put a graft in. And when he did it, he had to cross clamp the aorta above where the kidneys receive their blood flow. And so he kept asking for time because the kidneys could only go so long without perfusion with the blood. So he was really worried because this was above the renal artery. And so as I'm going through this case, I'm looking at this, I'm thinking of a way that you could actually perfuse the renal arteries while you were doing this case, just with a special shunt thing. And so my mind during the case was kind of going on this. And when I got home that night, I pulled up my engineering paper and I drew up some schematics and some drawings of this. And then the next morning, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm rounding with the vascular surgeon and the residents and stuff. And afterwards, I pulled him aside and I said, doctor, I was just wondering, I was thinking during the case yesterday, and can I show you this? And I showed him, and he looked it over and he said, Sean, who gave you this? And I said, well, no, I did this. And he said, well, when did you do it? And I said, well, last night. He said, Sean, we finished at 11 o'clock last night. When did you have time to do this? I said, well, I couldn't sleep, so I just wrote this up. And it's a way that you can still perfuse the kidneys during this bypass. And he looked at me and said, Sean, don't show this to anybody. You need to get this patented. This is critical. This is unbelievable. And let me tell you something. I'm a third year medical student at this point. I'm just trying to breathe. You know what I mean? I'm trying to keep my head above water. And so nothing went. The medicine is always evolving. And when you go into it, call it a pipe dream or whatever. When you go into it, you think everything's set. When you're a young medical student, you think everything's been figured out. Everything's set. Everybody knows what they're doing. It's optimized. But you started realizing it's far from the case. So I finished up medical school, went on to Cleveland Clinic for my residency, and I knew I was going to specialize in shoulder fairly soon. And at that point, I had some ideas and such. I passed them by Dr. John Brems, who was head of the shoulder service there at Cleveland Clinic. And he got me an audience with Dr. Rockwood, who was really the father of the modern day modular shoulder replacement. And he was working at DePuy. And so they flew me down to see him, which was a phenomenal experience meeting Dr. Rockwood.
Sure.
And it was just, he's the godfather of everything, And so I showed him my designs, and I got to be honest with you, they weren't phenomenal designs, but they were just ideas, and nothing ever came of that, really. I went on and did my shoulder reconstruction fellowship with Dr. Mattson up at University of Washington. And then I started my private practice with a multi-specialty group outside Milwaukee, just doing pure shoulder reconstruction. And after a couple of years, the phone rang one day, and it was some of the engineers who I had passed my ideas by years before. And they said, Dr. Churchill, we were wondering if you'd want to start a company with us to make a shoulder replacement. And I got to tell you, this was music to my ears because I've been out, 3 years, and no one really wanted to hear my designs or, see what I had to show and really put much thought into it. So I thought this was great. So they started the company Dio Valente Orthopedics and asked me to develop the shoulder platform with them. And I got Dr. Brems and, 3 other surgeons, and we started and it was just the greatest time of my life. We're designing stuff. And at one point, I said, why do we even need a stem? I don't think the shoulder needs a stem. The shoulder has a stem because of 2 reasons. One is the hip has a stem, and the hips were so much more advanced than the shoulders were at that point. And also the original shoulder replacement by Dr. Neer back in the 50s was for fractures, and you needed the stem to stabilize it because the proximal humerus was broken. Mm-hmm. The center of the ball is the center of the axis of the shaft, so there's no rotational force on this. I don't think you need a stem. So at that point, I drew up a stemless shoulder replacement on a napkin. So we started working on that, and we had our main shoulder replacement at that point called the Affinity. And the day we got FDA approval, actually Tournier, a French company, contacted us and said, "Hey, we'd like to purchase you." So we ultimately sold to Tournier, and Tournier asked, they said, Dr. Churchill, would you stay on and help develop the shoulder platform with our international team of experts? And I said, oh yeah, sure, I would love to stay on that. What a great opportunity. So I was on with Gilles Walsh, Pascal Below, and I mean, just the giants of the day. And so I helped design with Tournier, and then, this standard orthopedic acquisition change. Wright Medical then brought Tournier, and Wright Medical asked me, Dr. Churchill, would you stay on? And I said, yeah, absolutely, I'll stay on. And right at about that point, my design for the stemless, Tournier had decided to embrace that and develop that. And it was just coming out on the market with its IDE study and such. And so it was making a pretty big splash at that point, was, suddenly the shoulder, we wouldn't need a stem and such. So that was during the Wright Medical days. And then, about 6-8 years ago, Stryker for $5.6 billion bought Wright Medical, and Stryker said, Dr. Churchill, would you stay on and work with George Athwal and have an international team of experts and develop our entire shoulder platform for us? And I was super happy to do that. I love engineering and designing and stuff like that. So I was happy to do that. And that was great. I was doing that along my practice, but rewinding back to Wright Medical, it was kind of in the Wright Medical timeframe when those original engineers that had developed Valente Orthopedics and started that, they contacted me and they said, hey, Dr. Churchill, we started Dio Valente Orthopedics because we hated working for the big companies. And now we're back working at the big companies. Can we get the band back together again? Because why don't we do this? And so at that point, Genesis Innovation Group was founded. And with Genesis Innovation Group, they asked me to be the chief medical officer, which I was super happy to do. And the idea behind Genesis Innovation Group was that it was not going to be a one and done thing like Dio Valente Orthopedics was, but it was going to be an ongoing, concern where people could come in with napkin sketches, or, we all have ideas out there. A lot of people, whether they don't have to be doctors, nurses, PAs, anesthetists. I mean, anyone in the care continuum can see a problem with the medical treatment plan, whether it's out of the operating room or in the operating room, just things that could be improved. And so we decided, why don't we make it so that they can come and it can be a one-stop shop where we have a full R&D team, where we have, clean room technology, light manufacturing, obviously prototype lab. We can work with them on IP and get that filed. We can do light commercialization, marketing. We can do the whole thing under one roof. And that's really what Genesis Innovation Group was. So Genesis Innovation Group, has advanced, and I took over the helm of that, I don't know, about 8 years ago. I held it for 5 years or so. And then, more recently, Chance Leonard, who's on with us today, became CEO. But after about 3 years of Genesis, I'd be at shoulder and elbow meetings and such. And my friends and colleagues would always come up and say, hey, Sean, what are you working on? I love what you've done in the past. I want to be involved. And we really weren't raising capital at Genesis. We didn't need more funding at that point. And when I started talking to, my friends and partners and stuff, what I realized is what they were really saying is we want the ability to invest in early stage medical device, and we just don't know how to do it. You can't get on your Fidelity account and look up early stage medical device and, put your 401k money in it. So that's when we said, hey, I think there's another thing here that can be really advantageous to people. And that was a venture capital organization that only did medical device, early stage medical device. So that's when we founded, in 2017, we founded Cultivate MD as a way that people could invest in early stage medical device. So we started with our seed, well, we called it Seed Fund. We didn't know there'd be a 2, so we called it Seed. Now it's called Seed 1, but it was Seed 1 Fund and then Seed 2. So we're on our 5th fund now. And the premise is that you can invest in this, and we only do our early stage medical device. We don't do Bitcoin, we don't do real estate, precious metals, none of that stuff. We're just doing what we know. And so I'm the managing director of that. I have 3 partners of that, and really the idea is that there's a lot of great medical device companies out there that need funding and support. Mm-hmm. And I probably have about 400 inbound opportunities a year to invest. Wow. Incredibly selective on it. And, we've got our standard, criteria. It's got to meet a significant unmet need. It's got to have a standard workflow that doesn't change the workflow, because physicians don't like changing workflow. So we've got our standard set of criteria and such. And we mold that down to probably about 10 a year. And I do really hard diligence about 10 a year. And then we usually invest in about 2 companies a year. But that's the venture capital side of things that we've been working on, and we're launching our 5th fund now. So it's been very, very successful for us. So around 4 years ago, I talked to my partners and I said, my wife and I are from Colorado and we're here in Wisconsin, and we have adult children now who are having children of their own. They're all out of college and such. we wanted to move back home to Colorado where my elderly parents are. So we decided I would wrap up my practice and move back. And so now I do this full time. I'm on the board at Genesis Innovation Group, and I'm the managing director of the venture capital fund Cultivate MD.
Well, I tell you this, they won and you won relative to that relationship. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sure. Hi, everybody. Mike Donahue here. As a medtech leader, you know how important it is to hit the ground running when your new product clears FDA. You need to quickly align and equip your field sales team with training, customer targeting, sales assets, and operational resources that will maximize revenue and traction. Well, at Convey Med, we have the app for that. Convey Connect is the mobile-first launch operating system that ensures your field team is clinically confident, culturally aligned, and operationally efficient from day one. With your customized white-labeled Convey Connect app, your reps can train on the go, access agentic AI to identify ideal customer targets, query AI agents to provide intelligent answers to clinical and technical questions from your customers, communicate and engage with both company leadership as well as your teammates in the field, and then just so much more. So if you are interested in learning more about Convey Connect, go to our website, conveymed.io, where you can book a demo and we'd be happy to take you through the app. And now back to the show. I'm curious, Sean, that was a lot to process. Thank you for that. A lot of our listeners are also founders, executives in the medical device space. Tell us, from your perspective, both as a founder, but also as a surgeon, how important it is to have a clinical team involved early in the design and development of the product.
I think that's critical because, you have the two groups. You have the physicians who can recognize, and I'm just going to stick with surgical stuff here because that's just my, orthopedic specialty here. You see the surgeons who see the problems every single day in the operating room, and this doesn't work, that doesn't work, it's too big, it's too small, it's angled the wrong way. They see it every single day. But unfortunately, the vast majority of them just say, well, we just have to deal with this, and they just deal with it. They got a lot of stuff to do that day. They got a lot of cases, they got a lot of demands on their time, and they just do it. And then you have the other side of the coin, which are engineers, industry, who want to come up with, new products and new development and stuff. And unfortunately, bridging that gap sometimes is very difficult because the docs may want a device to do something. And when they talk to the engineers say, yeah, no, that can't happen. That we can't, that material doesn't exist. We can't do that. The tensile strengths, all the things that engineers think of. And then you have the engineers say, well, what about this? And the doctors sit there and laugh and say, you can't get there from here in the human body. Yeah, I mean, you can't do that. There are vessels, there's nerves. It doesn't work that way. You just don't understand. So having the connection, and I think that's one of the things that was very valuable for me, was having the engineering and medical, basis to be able to look at stuff and be able to work through that. So that became very valuable for me. But what I would encourage, any physician out there who sees a problem, and you're not the only one seeing that problem. If you see that problem, a lot of people have that same problem. The fact that it's still there means no one's taking an initiative to deal with it. Patients are, I don't want to necessarily use the word suffering, but not optimally being treated, cared for, rehabilitated. I encourage anybody who sees a problem to reach out and to try and solve that problem. And Genesis Innovation Group is a classic situation where you don't have to have the knowledge of how to market something or how to even file your IP. You can present it to a Genesis Innovation Group and say, hey, here's an idea I have. I don't know what to do with this. I'm paralyzed because I have no concept of the pathway to move forward here. Can you help me move forward? And I think that more and more people need to be bringing that forward, whether they're cost reductive measures or measures that can reduce, patient downtime, return to work status. There's all these things in the care continuum that can help and really actually help reduce medical costs by not having as many complications, infections, revisions, all of those matters.
Mm-hmm. I'll say this too, that as I looked at the technology on the Super Spacer, there's so much about this. I mean, it's like complete shoulder preservation.
Yeah, sure. So, I launched into it, but I mean, if you'd like, I can just talk a little bit about the latest thing that we're working on, the Super Spacer, and we can.
I'd love to know about that, and also what's the pathway regulatory wise.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that, mind you, going back to when I started practice, there was no reverse replacement. So the reverse replacement came out in 2004, and I will tell you, has changed the face of the shoulder world, and millions of patients are reaping the benefits of the reverse shoulder replacement, and it's been phenomenal. It wasn't evolutionary; it was revolutionary. I mean, it wasn't a tweaking of something; it was a true revolution of something. So the reverse has been phenomenal. And remember, when it came out, the reverse was limited to patients 70 and over. And that was the requirement, because there really wasn't a good backstop when that failed and you had to go in and revise that. Well, over time, the materials have gotten better, the techniques have gotten better, designs have improved, and there's a lot of reverses on the market that are infinitely better than they were when they started 20 years ago. And that's just how medicine goes. Subsequently, patients are now 65, 60, 55, 50 receiving these.
Yeah.
And it's become somewhat of a problem, because these patients are getting them younger and younger, and it's great, but they also wear out sooner and sooner and sooner. So when it came out and patients were getting to 65 or so, and they had phenomenal 15-year results from Europe, that's great. That doesn't translate to a 15-year result when you put in a 45-year-old.
Exactly.
Because the wear pattern from a 65-year-old person who's going to take it from 65 to 80 is a different wear pattern than a person going from 45 to 60.
For sure.
So one of the things that always frustrated me is, when you're dealing with a rotator cuff, tear, maybe it's the first time you've seen the patient, maybe they've had 3 operations, and there's just no tissue there. That supraspinatus is just gone. The muscles atrophy. There's just nothing there. We've tried numerous things. We've tried, shaving down this top bone, the acromion. I call that raising the roof, give it a little more space. We've tried removing the bone on the humerus. I call that lowering the floor, the tuberoplasty, just to get anything to get more space in there. We've tried grafts and augments and superior capsule reconstructions, and all of these have limitations. And the problem is they're biological things that will wear out with time. And I just look at this and I think that person who's got that 2.5 centimeter tear in their supraspinatus and comes into your office and they're 40 years old and say, I just want to throw the ball in my yard with my kid. I mean, they're not asking to go crazy with this. They're just saying, I just want to have that overhand throwing motion that I can do without pain. I want to be able to sleep without it hurting. Then my heart would go out for those people. And as physicians, we would try everything we could, this graft here and this graft here and all these things, but they always wore out. So it's been working on my mind for just, years and years about, we need to get something in there that can help resolve this. And ultimately, I went through, the standard, design drawings and modifications, and it sits on the shelf for a while and you come back to it, that type of thing. We came up with the super spacer, and I presented it to the Genesis group, 3 years ago or so. And Chance finally revived it. He did a great job in telling the engineers, he said, hey, we want to get this project going. Let's support it and get it. So we've got now a surgeon design team that's really polished this thing up nice and everything. So it's ready to go. But what the premise is I didn't want this to be a material play, a material construction. What I wanted is what do we have in the shoulder that's been out there for years, decades, that we know how it performs? There's no surprises here. The bone ingrowth, on-growth material, we know how that spray works. We know how cobalt chrome molybdenum works. We know how the bone reacts to it. Let's get something out of that will be permanent, and we know the characteristics of. And so what we developed was the super spacer, and easy approach is through a small deltoid split. So by this point, the person's had probably 1 or 2 operations on this. So it's the old mini open lateral split. So no deltoids removed from the acromion. You just widen your arthroscopy portal to about 4 centimeters, and you're looking right down on it. So the design team was phenomenal. The engineers at Genesis were outstanding, and we've gotten this down to, quite frankly, if you're an experienced surgeon, it's going to be a 25-minute case. If you're an inexperienced surgeon, it might take you 40. But the goal being is we want it always reproducible. Every single time when you get in there, it's reproducible. We want this thing to be done literally like a third-year resident could do it. Okay. This is not the hyper specialist shoulder reconstruction person that you have to travel 4 hours to get to and wait 3 months. This is the general orthopedic surgeon can do it. The sports medicine doctor, is perfect candidate for deploying that. So we wanted a whole range of surgeons to be able to do this and have it be very reproducible every single time.
I love it.
Our goal with this, and we've developed it phenomenally well. The team has been excellent. We're currently now fleshing out the regulatory pathway. And I don't want to steal your thunder, Chance. If you want to talk more about Super Spacer, you're the CEO of Capitan Orthopedics. I'll turn it over to you for now.
No, well, I tell you, it's funny, guys, because I've known Sean's name from afar during my 31 years in the medical device space. But I learned something new every single time that ends up inevitably. I would say to myself, well, that doesn't actually surprise me anymore. Coming up with a vascular type of device in the middle of a third-year medical school is pretty amazing. But, Capitan is really unique. We're really excited about the technology because there's a lot of simplicity in it, as you guys have mentioned, looking at this. What are we trying to actually accomplish? Well, there's a lot of entities, and rightly so, kind of running to the front end of the care continuum to try to address a better anchor, right? But the problem with it is if the tissue is really bad in these patients that are 30 to 60 years old, what options do you have? And there are really not many. There's of course, some quote competitive product out there with the SCR and, of course, with the in-space balloon from Stryker. But those ultimately aren't ideal, and they're really not long-term solutions. And then you get to reverse, which you would like to actually keep that as a true possibility, at 65, 70 years old, where it was originally positioned. And so what we wanted to try to come up with, and there's a real connection to this, because when I first got to Genesis, I was unaware of the conversation that had taken place in basically March of 2023, where Sean had been talking with the engineers saying, this is something that we really need to look at. And I told our team, we're going to work with projects that are with current companies, that when clients that we work with, we're going to have new clients and new projects, but we need to look internally, so let's look, and there's such brain power here. Let's capitalize on that. And so in August of 2023, this came about, and they said, hey, we got this project. And I said, no, I don't think that's truly viable. We got another project. Well, I don't think that's pretty viable either. But then they said, well, let's talk about rotator cuff tears. I'm like, oh my gosh, I literally just had this surgery less than a year ago. And I had no idea, gentlemen, what the statistics were.
Oh, yeah.
The irony of it is that most surgeons, and I don't say this negatively, but, a lot of times they're so busy, they're not really communicating what the potential outcomes are of a re-tear within 2 years.
Yes.
So you guys know this, there are, if you're 50 years or older, you've got better than a 50% chance that you actually already have a partial tear that you really don't, know that you have. It's non-symptomatic, but each year, 2 million people have a true rotator cuff injury, and over 800,000 are going in for a primary rotator cuff repair from the surgical side of things. And then there's about 300,000 or more that actually have a irreparable cuff tear. And so I said, well, this is near and dear to my heart, because had I known, I probably wouldn't have been as aggressive in a sense I was in the rehab process, knowing that you're looking at somewhere between 30 and 40% on average of a re-tear within 2 years. There was even a study that came out recently with one product that is, really needed, and that's an augment. But of 40 patients that were utilizing an augment, 50% of those tore within 2 years. So having something that can be a more permanent solution, that is simple and reproducible with a novel technology and addressing the biomechanics. I'll let Sean talk to you about what his vision of this was, because of his experience with the joint, but that is so critical in this. I kind of like to say we tried to engineer this knowing that there's a lot of people in the care pathway, right, that are dealing with the patient. But if you remember, in the cephalomedullary nail introduction in the early 2000s, right, we went from a blade plate to a DHS to a cephalomedullary nail. And we would talk to surgeons and say, look, you're going to spend more time sending this patient up on the fracture table than you're doing this procedure, because once you place this guide wire, instrumentation takes care of it from there. So, working with Sean and our design team, we try to create the same sort of environment, in a sense, 7 simple steps to place this It's a known surgical approach and really make it easy for a non-fellowship trained surgeon to actually do the procedure as well.
Absolutely. And I think too, that if I look at this, it's not just the kinematics and how fascinating that is for the minimal amount of bone that you're having to address. Okay.
Yes.
That's immediately aware, but the angulation of the stem, if you want to call it that, into the humeral head and not having to disrupt really anything. I got a question. What has happened in the history of our bodies, let's say the last 20 years, and I'm not talking about us guys, but I'm talking about the 40 somethings, the 30 somethings, to where this is becoming such a need? What's happening?
Yeah. So a couple, I'll take those one step at a time. So, that was one of the design premises when we sat down with this is we want this bone conserving. Okay. Because every surgeon should be thinking, what's my bailout down the road when this fails? And so we really wanted bone conserving. And I think that's every orthopedic surgeon over the last 20 years has started realizing the bone is a precious commodity in the human body. And so we really want to preserve that. So this only removes about a millimeter and a half of bone over in that tuberosity region. And quite frankly, if you go in after we've done this in a cadaver and we've removed it, the proximal humerus looks more like a patient who would be getting a reverse because they've already had that bone resorbed over time, because it's not being used and it's rubbing up against the acromion. So it actually looks like the natural evolution of this condition where the tuberosity gets worn down on the top. Every time you do this, that bone rubs and rubs and rubs. So we weren't really losing anything. So we've actually looked at it and said, okay, now suppose this person has this implant in, 5, 10 years, 15 years, and then needs to transition to a reverse. Because I want to make sure that I'm clear. This isn't by no means marketing itself or believing it will replace the reverse. No, what we're trying to do is give you a nice option, as Chance said, when you're in that 30 to 60-year-old range. If you can get 10 years, 15 years before going to the reverse, that saves you that reverse revision down the road. So that's what we're really going for. So when you go in there and you actually do this procedure, then remember, this is through a small lateral deltoid incision here, just a vertical slit here you go into. The delta pectoral is what's used for your reverse. So that is untouched territory still. So down the road, when a physician needs to go in and revise this to a reverse down the road, 15 years or whatever, they've got virgin territory they're going through. So it's like an index, operation there. And then going in there and just doing your standard humeral head cut, the neck cut for a reverse, this implant will then come right off with that. So at that point, then you're looking at bone as if you're doing a primary reverse. And that's really been our goal for this is you don't want to have a revision on revision material. It's like, well, I should have just done the reverse in the first place if I'm going to have a revision. So you want to be able to, when you're doing this to reverse, go in there and say, yeah, this looks like virgin bone here that's never been touched here. Yeah, we're ready to deal with this. So that really was what extends the lifetime of the reverse, is because then it's like a primary reverse, if you will. So that was the goal with that one. And then you asked another question about what's happened with our lives and our careers. Well, I mean, our lives are completely different than we have been over the history of time. I mean, you look at grandparents when I was a child and my grandmother sat in a rocking chair and, did some stuff around the house. You look at grandmas now and they're out doing triathlons, they're running a marathon, they're rock climbing, they're at the gym. So we're a much more active, non-sedentary group as far as that goes. So keeping that activity going, not just in your 20s and 30s, but you'll be out there rock climbing or doing heavy manual labor, 50s and such like that, and moving on. Just not only the sporting, but also our way of life as far as activities has just caused more demands on our shoulders. And as such, when you have these defects and these problems, you realize I can't perform like I was. I want to get back to that because I enjoyed that. Doctor, can you help me? And I think that's where it was, rather than just say, well, go back, in the 1950s. Well, I'm 50. I'm done. I can't do anything. None of us would accept that now.
No. And to that point, I think that it's fascinating to me. I bet you your website and or your email or info@capitanortho.com is blowing up.
Yeah. I'll let Chance address that because as CEO, Chance gets all of this. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it really is, because I think the great thing about it is we chose to address something that is a very difficult indication. Most of the feedback, you guys I'm sure hear this too, in talking with surgeons and stuff, is that, and even with independent distributors who are entrepreneurial in nature, that they standing in the operating room, they hear these sorts of things, this frustration, with these especially young patients who they need an alternative for. And so we're trying to address that in a way. The demand and the appetite has been very significant. So much so that you kind of look at it when we started a capital raise. We started our capital raise, believe it or not, December 1st. Right? And most people would look at things and say, well, why in the world are you doing this in the middle of two biggest holidays, every year? And we looked at it as an opportunity to see what the appetite for, solving this indication was, and what the investor side of things, especially on the private side of things, if they see the value of this, right? And so we're trying to, first and foremost, as Sean mentioned, solve a clinical problem. All right. That's the first thing the technology has to do. Secondly, you do need to create a better patient outcome that's documentable, especially in the published papers. Thirdly, you have to have, a better surgeon user experience, and especially if it fits into their current workflow, do they have to change or deviate much, from it? It has to be very efficient, meaning that we did this in all sterile packaging. So there's no time required in order to bring it into the operating room from the ASC or hospital setting. And it has to be cost effective. We know there's actually a code out there that we've already identified through our consultant on the reimbursement side to ensure that this can be utilized well. So that is resonating with all of our early investors. We've already had 2 closings. If that tells you, less than 30 days, basically, we had a closing and 2 closings in January, and we're getting ready to have a couple more.
Oh, congratulations. Yeah, that's amazing. I'm curious. So I want to probe a little bit on what you said, Chance, around what clinical success looks like. It looks like the way your design is evolving is you are restoring or attempting to restore near or normal biomechanics of the shoulder. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yep. Yes.
So then what does clinical success look like? That sounds like you put a lot of time and energy into, it's going to be an easy technique. It's not going to be a big change to the workflow. It's going to be sterile packed. It's going to be made out of materials that are well known in medical device. What does clinical success look like? Because this is different. I mean, it's not like the uni spacer in the knee, which was not a big success, but in some respects, that may be the thing that people think about is, oh, you're putting a spacer in the shoulder. Well, that didn't work in the knee. Why is it going to work in the shoulder? What is the clinical outcome that you are seeking that will spell success for?
Yeah. Chance, let me jump on that one. So from my standpoint is there's 2 big things as a physician when you're looking at how you can improve patients' lives. One is pain control, and one is improved function. Mm-hmm. And when you give patients the option, they always want pain control. Mm-hmm. Okay. If you can only pick one, they say, I just want to be able to sleep at night. Mm-hmm. I want to be out of pain. So what happens in this condition is when that supraspinatus, the top rotator cuff muscle, tears and is irreparable, maybe it's had several attempts, maybe not, but is irreparable. Initially, the ball stays very centered in the socket. Okay. If as soon as it tore, if the ball moved out of the socket, we would need MRI scans. We would just get an x-ray and say, oh, the ball's moved up. We know you got a tear. Let's go to the operating room. Okay. But Initially the ball stays very centered, but over time, because the supraspinatus no longer can keep the head centered when the arm elevates, the deltoid, the big muscle on the outside here, the deltoid starts to pull that ball up in the socket. Mm-hmm. And just like the front end of your car, when it's out of alignment, those tires go bad real quick. Okay. As soon as that ball is slightly out of alignment on the socket, now it starts to wear real quick. And so not only do you have the pain of the abutment on this top bone, the acromion with the ball as it hits there with that tuberosity, but you also now have basically a ball and socket out of joint and it's rubbing on a rim. And so you lose the cartilage on your ball and socket very, very quickly. Mm. So the idea behind the super spacer is it will maintain that space and the ball centered. So if the ball maintains its centered position, the chronic night ache that occurs with the bone rubbing against it and the cartilage out of position and wearing on the cartilage, kind of the arthritic pain that, you hear people talk about, I just can't sleep at night. So I take an Advil or a leave before I go to bed because it hurts so much. And that's arthritic type pain. Mm-hmm. So That's clinical success, is for the people to say, if you had a matched pair, the person who has the tear and goes on in 5 years says, man, my shoulder just aches all the time. It just is constant aching. And the person with the super spacer says, man, my shoulder feels great. It feels fine. Even if there was no improved function, that would be a win, because that person would say, hey man, I feel great. I'm able to work at my office. I don't have a problem. I'm able to sleep at night. I don't have an issue, Okay. So, but that really, to me, would not be ultimate success, because we want improved function. So the way that the function improves on this is, this gives it somewhat of a lever arm, a cam action, such that the deltoid can more effectively raise the arm. Because just like if you have a rubber band, and say the rubber band's resting length is 3 inches, you pull that rubber band out to 5 inches and it gives you some nice tug. It's working like a rubber band. But if you put it back at 3 1/4 inches, it's kind of almost floppy, because it's almost at its resting length. Well, the deltoid can raise the arm when the ball is centered, because it's at length. But if the deltoid shortens up as the ball moves up in the shoulder, now the deltoid oftentimes can't lift the arm effectively. So by maintaining that length relationship, it's like keeping the rubber band stretched so that it can work effectively. So that's going to be then the functional improvement, when the person says, not only can I throw because it doesn't hurt, I can throw because the muscles allow me to do that and to work. Because the deltoid will compensate for much of this if it's kept at the right length. So that, to me, is the success. Clinical success is pain improvement relief, functional improvement relief, and that they can still do their activities daily living, as well as overhead activities and the sporting activities that they want.
Is there a validated function scoring methodology in the shoulder?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So as we go through the regulatory clearance pathway along with the FDA in this, we're going to set up our study very, very tightly with 4 or 5 patient-reported outcome measures and physician-guided. These outcome measures, they're out there. They're well described. Constant score, ASES, WU score, SST. There's numerous out there, and we want to make sure that we capture those that can then document the minimum clinical, improvement necessary to see a change in that, and that all our patients are achieving that and doing well. So it's just not someone saying, yeah, I'm better. You can actually look at their scores and say, well, they were a 42 before, and now they're an 87 on a 100-point scale, that type of thing. That's what we're looking for.
That's awesome.
I
can see this definitively as having a massive impact on the need for corticosteroids.
The thing about the injections for the shoulder is when you have a rotator cuff tear, that injection doesn't stay in the bursa. It goes into the joint. Exactly. And we know that these repeated injections that people, because they feel better, that they want those, slowly eats away and deteriorates that cartilage in there. So while it's a short-term success, it's a long-term acceleration of the natural progression of the problem. Exactly. And so I think, Chris, you're spot on. If the person is comfortable and functional, they're not going to be going to that doctor's office every 6 months to say, hey, doc, can you give me another injection because I want to feel better? So I think that's a great point.
I have one last question, and I'm going to leave the rest to Mike. How soon do you expect that this would be on market? And by that, what do you believe the FDA pathway is?
Yeah, I believe the FDA pathway is going to be initially a safety study followed by IDE, because this is a new product that we really it's so new and novel. There isn't a perfect predicate for it. It's not, as I said, it's not a evolution of something out there that we can piggyback on. This is truly a revolutionary device. So I believe it will be, for clearance, will be an IDE type pathway in order to get there. So those pathways for joint replacements are usually a 2-year study. So what I'm envisioning is that we would start patient operations with this as part of the beginning of this would be probably Q4 of this year. Okay. And then obtain clearance about approximately 2 years after that, and then it'd be out for the masses. So normally in something like this, the clinical pathway might be 50, 100 patient study, 150 patient study, whatever it is. So there will be individuals at certain centers who would be candidates for this and be able to receive it. And then once full FDA clearance is obtained, then it would be out for the masses and full commercialization.
Great. I might need it at that point.
Okay, we'll sign you up.
It's coming in hot, guys.
Yeah. As men of a certain age, we all might be candidates. Well, is there anything else, guys, you want to bring forth? It sounds like you've got a lot on your plate. We're super excited for the future of Capitan Orthopedics. You guys are certainly on to an unsolved problem and a novel solution. A lot of work ahead of you, but it sounds like you guys have a great team in place. Is there anything else that you guys want to bring up before we wrap up another episode of the MedTech Jam session?
Well, I just want to say I appreciate all your time, gentlemen. This was a great time, well spent with you both, Mike and Chris. Chance, did you have anything else that you wanted to say there?
Really enjoyed the time. Really appreciate the opportunity to connect and certainly hear much more of the story of Sean. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit more about Capitan and this unique indication and the response that we're receiving so far and where we'll get to in a short period of time.
Yeah, thank you both.
Yeah. Check us out wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple, Spotify, maybe YouTube, and look us up on LinkedIn. We're excited to, again, have another great episode with our friends Sean Churchill and Chance Leonard from Capitan Orthopedics. Take care, guys.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen.